Good morning, everyone, and thank you for coming to our session on problem-based learning. I'm excited to have the conversation with you today about that topic. My name is Dr. Yvonne Johnson, and I work in the Center for Innovative Teaching and Learning, where I help with everything related to pedagogy, andragogy, integration of different tools with teaching and learning, and I also teach doctoral level research courses in the College of Health and Human Sciences. And I'm excited to connect with you all today. To begin building that community, and we do this in all of our sessions, and we have a small group today, so if you can turn on your microphone and share your introduction that way, or you can type it in the chat. Either way is fine. But learning a little bit about each other and getting connected helps to build that foundation for constructing knowledge in the community. So if someone could share their name and department and their role or what they teach at NAU, that'd be great. So please go ahead.
All right, I'll start out. I'm Sean Jeffers. I'm an instructor with the Division of Public Administration. I recently retired from executive leadership in the nonprofit sector. I had been an adjunct to public administration for a decade and a half. And so upon retirement, have picked up an expanded kind of course role. And my interest in this particular topic is last semester, I headed the capstone project class for our master's students, and the problem-based learning aspect was a part of that, and I had very limited knowledge. So what I do for the School of Public Administration is kind of pick up a number of different courses. So my specialty is more nonprofit, but of late I picked up policy courses. I'm going to teach in HR. So wherever they plug me in, I try and deliver something of quality for it. But this idea of problem-based learning is important to me from a professional perspective to learn more about.
That's awesome. Thank you for sharing your introduction and your expertise, and welcome, Sean.
This is Dr. Kimberly Hart. I'm in the Counseling and Higher Education Department, a clinical associate professor. I primarily teach practicum and internship-based courses that are field experience courses, as well as micro-intervention skill courses.
Great. Thank you very much, Dr. Kimberly Hart, for sharing your introduction and expertise.
Hi, I'm Joshua. I'm a first-year assistant professor at computer science, and now I'm teaching a machine learning class on a graduate level. And next semester, I will be teaching some undergraduate course. Thanks.
Okay, great. Thank you. Thank you very much for joining us, Joshua. Okay.
Thanks. Thanks.
You're welcome.
I'm Jeff Kidder in the sociology department, and yeah, I was just curious about learning some more about, improving teaching and that kind of thing.
Great, thank you. Thank you for joining us, Jeff, and for sharing your introduction. Kevin, do you want to share an introduction, please?
Sure. Hi, everyone. Good morning. I am Dr. Kevin Foreman, and I work at the Center for Innovative Teaching and Learning. My career of over 2 decades has been in the ESL classroom, teaching content-based art and design for international students, as well as teaching undergraduate and graduate art history courses. And I've used problem-based learning throughout my entire educational career.
Great, thank you so much. And it's wonderful to have such a mix of different disciplines and experiences today, which provides a strong foundation for conversation and in learning. And our focus today will be problem-based learning, and I will send you this PowerPoint after the session. And there's a short video from Maastricht University. The link is in this slide, and you'll be able to take a look at it, but it does a good job of kind of a very succinct explanation of problem-based learning. So you might want to take a look at that after this session today. And when we think about problem-based learning, it's a different kind of an approach to active learning, and the problem is shared with the students before there's prep or before the study has occurred. So they are learning about the concepts and developing the problem-solving skills at the same time so they're learning and about problem-based learning when they're solving these problems. And the teaching role is a little bit different. There's facilitation, mentoring, guiding, sharing resources, kind of that guide on the side type of approach. And students are developing those learning how to learn skills. It's a student-centered approach, uses small groups, and information is discovered through self-directed learning. And we structure these problem-based learning situations to facilitate students going through this process. And the small groups are working cooperatively while they are seeking and discovering solutions to real-world problems. And we know that when students see that there's an authentic problem and that they're engaged and working on solving these problems, that they are more invested in the activity. They see value in it. They see that it's applicable to their learning in college, but also outside of college in their careers. And they'll learn the information at deeper levels. And when we talk about the problems that they're addressing, they're very complex problems. And we'll talk about kind of identifying problems for problem-based learning and considerations related to that. The problems should be, they're complex problems. They're problems that we encounter every day in our daily professional engagements, and they should be unfamiliar to the students, and it's going to take them, require them to kind of stretch a bit to go beyond their knowledge and beyond their comfort zone to address this complex and ill-structured problem. There's not a one correct answer to these problems that you're identifying for a problem-based learning activity. They'll be using inquiry-based type of approaches, collecting information, reflecting, and then evolving independently as they're learning and problem-based learning skills develop, and then navigating the small group activities, and bouncing ideas off of each other. And there's no one fixed correct solution. So those are some aspects of the problem that you need to keep in mind when you're thinking about introducing a problem-based learning type of activity in your class. And scaffolding is an approach that we talk about a lot in education. We're teaching the students new skills. Gradually, we're kind of setting up this structure where we're optimizing their learning and providing some support at different levels of support as their learning continues, and I'll show you a graphic of that. There's a systematic sequencing, so we're thoughtful about how we introduce the problem, how we facilitate the process of going through and resolving the problems, coming up with potential solutions. And as the facilitator, guide on the side, teacher for problem-based learning type of activities, the support that we provide gradually reduces over time. So the students in the beginning, they have more support, and then as their skills increase, they have less support, and they're expected to be more self-directed in their learning and trying to solve these problems in their small groups. And we need to be thinking about how we're guiding them through this process. And I have a number of resources that I will send to you after this session that gives you examples and some steps that you can follow to guide students through these problems, because it can be difficult. It's a complex problem. They have a small group dynamic going on. They're not familiar with the content. You have to help them to develop these inquiry-based learning techniques and skills and problem-solving skills and working together. So there's a lot going on. It's a very rich, active learning environment. And the impact is significant on their learning. And this is the model that I was talking about with at the beginning. If you look in the far left bottom corner, in the beginning, the teacher, the facilitator has provides more structure, and the student's level of autonomy is lower. But then as they continue to work through this problem, and it could be a project that lasts for a long time, then the structure that the professor provides reduces and the student's level of autonomy increases. So at the end, they have a high level of autonomy and lower structure as they become more adept at this whole process. So you need to think about that when you're designing or selecting a problem. And I do have some resources where they have some sample problems that you can look at and maybe adapt for your courses. And when the students are in this process, they're very engaged. There's inquiry and investigation going on. There's a lot of questioning. They are expected to collect data, evaluate it, justify it, provide backup for their reasoning, be able to explain it, be able to communicate with others in their small group and share it with, let's say, the larger group, or if you're working with a nonprofit like Sean was talking about, perhaps with another organization. So it's a very active, engaging process among the people involved. So other things that they're doing is they need to observe what's going on. They're recording the information. They need to come up with a problem. What is this problem? And they're working with their group, forming questions. They need to figure out what do they know? What do they not know? And for the person who is leading these groups, you need to be able to articulate the expectations and kind of guide them through this process. You're going to be examining results. The students are going to be examining results. Reflection is a really important part of learning. And what you could do is you can give them a couple of prompts to guide them through some focused reflection to get them to think about maybe their own learning in this process and how they were thinking, how they were problem solving, things like that. What they could maybe do differently next time, what insights did they gain, things like that. And communicating with others is also a key aspect. And some of these slides have different models of problem-based learning. For instance, this one shows a circular process because as the students gain information, they question, they come up with potential solutions, and the process continues. So they have this potential solution, maybe there's some challenges with it, they get some feedback, and it keeps going. So this is depicted in a different way in this particular model of problem-based learning. And they continue that research and inquiry process until they've come up with some reasonable solution that they can explain that will work, let's say, for the client, and they can provide justification for that. Okay, so Kevin, you said you had some experience with problem-based learning in your teaching. Could you share just a short example of how you applied that process in one of your courses, please?
Sure, I'd be happy to. Um, there's a couple different ways I've used this in the past in my art history classroom. And this is something that I did during our seminar abroad, trips to Europe when we were studying art history in various locations. But for some really neat concrete, like no pun intended, but we were in museums and galleries and looking at Greek and Roman architecture is a wonderful way of using this. And really trying to put students in the heads of imagining they were on an archaeological dig and they found some of these ruins, which are now in museums or galleries. Sometimes we were out in the field and could actually just do this on location. But when possible, having them really. So the problem is they've just discovered something and they don't know how to identify this cornice or entablature or Ionic or Doric or Corinthian order of a column, for example. And so they just have fragments. And so they need to start going through this evaluation process or a checklist of sorts to figure out like what era is this from? Or, like is this Egyptian? And just really trying to go through the context and have them put on that archaeological art historian perspective to try to whittle out what it's definitely not. And sometimes they would get stuck, of course, and that's part of the whole point of this. But having them think through the what if this or what if that or that type of situation. So
awesome. Thank you. Okay, so that's a really good introduction into the instructor role in the process. So you were talking about that kind of guiding them and helping them get through the process of identifying these items from different eras and stuff. And so as the instructor, you're helping identify and will you provide this ill-structured problem? So you had them at a dig or something like that. So it's an ill-structured problem. You need to set benchmarks to help the students to know where they are because you'll have some kind of a due date and then there should be some intermediate benchmarks that they need to meet. And you can, as they get stuck and they're moving through the process, then you'll be asking probing questions, more details, challenging them, asking them about their thinking, and facilitating that metacognitive process, and provide a group work protocol, which is important, and there are examples of that. And when you provide a protocol for the group, then that gives students some guidelines for what they're expected to, their roles in the group, and you're monitoring their learning and adjusting the levels of challenge. And one of the things that you need to be cognizant of is that they need to be challenged, and they need to be gradually gaining more expertise. You don't want to throw out a really, 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 really complex problem that's far beyond the level of, let's say, the course they're taking. You want to make sure that the level of complexity is appropriate for if it's a 100 level course or 300 level course or 600 level course or whatever. So you want to monitor their learning and adjust the challenge as appropriate. Sometimes you have students in a class that have a lot of experience and they can handle more complex problems, or you have students that are brand new to the discipline and topic, and so then you would have a different level of challenge for them. Keep them involved and moving through the process, and so those intermediary benchmarks will help. And maybe you have them present every so often or share some sort of status reports, either online or in person. They could do a video or whatever, but keep them moving along that process. And helping with managing the group dynamics, facilitating, coaching them through that process. We know that's important. And identifying assessments that you're going to use for determining if they've been successful in this problem resolution process. And think about a significant aspect of this is the process, and where did they start in their problem solving inquiry skills, and where are they moving toward, how proficient are they getting at that, and in terms of also working with others in the group, finding ways to solve these complex thorny problems, as continuing to be more self-directed individually and then with their groups. And so there's a lot of process parts of this that are very valuable. And if you can highlight those and ask students about their learning and how they're moving on that process, they can really get a lot out of these types of projects. And you can involve them in planning and the questioning process. And so that shows them that they are valued, their perspectives are valued, that they have some input and stake in the issues that are being addressed. And that helps to also increase their commitment and engagement with the process. So those are some of the problem-based learning instructor guidelines. And then students are expected to become familiar with this situation that you're giving them, come up with some hypotheses, hunches, what are possibly the problems here, what's happening. They need to identify what they know. They need to struggle through, okay, to resolve this problem, what do we not know, which can be difficult because they're learning the content as they're learning the problem, as they're going through this problem-based learning activity. But when they're struggling with it, that's part of the learning process, and we know that the reasoning and coming to an understanding is it's a lot more effective if they go through that process and come to the realization and the enlightenments themselves than if they're just given the information and memorize it. So this process is very powerful. And so you need to come up with a list of what needs to be done, maybe what kind of research do they need, come up with some kind of a problem statement, assign people in the group to how they're going to handle this, present their findings and reflect and keep going. And so your guidance in this process is key, and also explaining to them what's happening in the process can help them to avoid some of those struggles that if they don't understand the process, then they might struggle with that instead of really getting to the learning that we're trying to get them to learn about the process and to come up with a viable solution to a problem. So it can be a new process for some students, but developing those skills is something we know that they'll use throughout their entire lives. So learning that, as I tell my students, you're here to learn. This is a learning laboratory. You want to go through those struggles now and ask the questions, and you're in a safe place for learning. And then when you try this on the job or internship or whatever, you'll already have these kinds of experiences as a foundation for success in your future problem resolution situations. So for the problem, you want to think about a large problem and then some sub problems that need to be addressed. There's going to be some potential solutions. They are going to need to be able to provide their reasoning and explanations for how they came up with these solutions and why they think they're valuable. And they might change. And that's really important to let students know that as they're going through this process and they collect more information, what they thought was a viable solution might not be a viable solution anymore after they've collected more information. And we know that's a very realistic situation in the professional world. So they need to be open to that. And then thinking about what information is going to be needed and what are the next steps. You as the facilitator are going to think about what do you need to provide them and how are you going to plan this out. And then you need to clarify the learning steps, the learning tasks, and have them think about if there's not information. One of the things we talked about earlier was they need to identify what they know, what they don't know. How are they going to find out what they don't know? How are they going to get information? Are there resources? Are there people? Are there sites they need to go to? So there's a lot of questioning inquiry going on here and research. And as we know, when you're problem solving, they're bouncing ideas off each other in the group. And the roles emerge and people will take on different responsibilities and the tasks list will shift as they collect more information. Maybe they don't need any more information. Okay, now what do they need to do? They need to come up with couple potential resolutions, and then how are they going to explain this to people? How are they going to share this with the client? How are they going to share this with the class? What's their backup? So those are types of things that you think about when you're putting together the problem. And there's a lot of benefits to problem-based learning. If students get very engaged in it, they are, they feel empowered. They see that it's important and relevant to their discipline, to their future careers. So they can get really excited about it. And we've seen students, I mean, I think back to the different problem-based learning activities I've had, and I was in a human resource development class when I was an undergrad, and there was um, an automobile plant being built in the town where we lived, and they were putting out bids for an HR process. They wanted the different people to submit bids for how this process is going to be handled and things like that. And so that became our problem for that HR class that I was in, and it was very authentic. We looked at the information provided by the company, we looked at their standards, we competed with each other in the class, and it was very motivating. The students worked really hard at that project, and we were critically thinking, really analyzing and then debating about, well, do we really think that's going to resolve the problem? Is that going to really meet their needs? The authenticity was right on. And since we were so motivated, we each worked independently and then brought things together, and then shared responsibilities as well. So it was a very authentic and powerful activity, and very relevant. And that was a number of years ago, and I still remember it very well today. So it definitely has an impact. Let me see here. Okay, so some of the considerations when you are creating or thinking about using problem-based learning approach, you need to be thinking about, it's a time-intensive process, but it's powerful and impactful. The role of the students is different, so you need to explain that to the students so that they understand the expectations, and that they're going to be going through this process. They don't know the answers, and they're learning them as they're researching and addressing this problem. And that's very different than giving them a specific one correct answer situation that they repeat back to. So you need to clearly explain this to them, and then provide relevant examples so they can see why this is valuable to them. And your role as an instructor, that's, the guide on the side, planning the project, moving them along, things like that, and helping to ferret out those answers, guiding them by asking them questions and how are they going to apply this. So it's different again than sharing out that one correct answer and then having them share it back. So you got to think about how you're going to handle that. And appropriate problems, you need complex problems that don't have one correct solution, that have many stakeholders that with different needs and different priorities, and then assessment. How are you going to assess the different phases of the problem solving? And I have some different rubrics and things that I'll share with you that you could consider. Let's talk about how you might identify a problem. Now, we have people from different disciplines in here. So you're trying to figure out this complex problem with different, maybe vying stakeholders, or maybe different budget constituencies or various things. So for your particular discipline, what might you consider in terms of how to identify a problem-based learning activity? Like where might you go and what might a possible topic be?
Well, for us, the public administration, at least for the class I'm teaching, is quite simple. We send out to local government and nonprofit organizations conditions that need to be met for students to take on a project. So they'll submit a variety of different projects, and we can then go through the PBL process to try and walk through as they select the problems they're going to take on.
Okay, awesome. Okay, great. So you already have a mechanism in place. That's great that you have that. Thank you for sharing that.
I mean, I think in some ways, I'm just sort of thinking that like almost any sort of research question that a sociologist might want to answer, or I guess anyone in the social sciences might want to
Mhm.
answer, could be framed in terms of a problem, right? That we want to learn more about poverty, or we want to learn. I mean, that's a little broad, but
Mhm.
and then one of the problems to solve could be, how do we narrow down this topic of poverty into a research question? So I don't know. That's how I'm thinking about it, at least at this exact moment.
Mhm. Mhm. Yes, that's a good point. Because definitely the problems of sociological interests are complex, and you have so many different perspectives from which to address them. So there's a lot of potential there. Then I think narrowing it down, like you said, identifying the research focus is really important because um, there's just so many ways you can look at it. So maybe sort of, okay, say there's poverty, but let's take a look at this particular aspect of it. And then within that, there's still a lot of complex um, factors. Yep, that's a great idea. Yes, definitely. And then Kimberly, did you say um, you work with them on their casework, or what was that?
I
Clara.
work primarily with counseling students, so when they're in practicum and internship, so in some ways they have readily available, not that I would call their clients problems, but since we're talking about problem-based learning, right? So,
Yeah.
every week when they're working with, I facilitate as a class, I facilitate their group supervision, and so they're
Mhm.
seeing clients, and in group supervision, we usually do like sort of what we call like consultation meetings, so um, presented they were either presented with like sort of a counseling based or supervision based like sort of problem to solve in a sense, or they're bringing in like sort of clients they're working with, and sort of one student maybe bringing in sort of a client scenario that the client's not a problem, but they're sort of trying to figure out how to best work with them, and so that could be like the identified problem type of deal. And then
Yeah.
as a group trying to work through sort of supporting this one clinician in how they will work with their client, and at the same time trying to engage in like vicarious learning, such that, right, the other students, if they had a client like this or adjacent, they
Mhm.
can still kind of learn from even whatever problem or client is presented in that scenario. And
Mhm.
similarly so with doc students I work with who are developing skills as teachers and supervisors and other skills dynamics. So, um,
Mhm.
yeah, so I think sort of like their field experience
Yeah.
work is the quote unquote problem earlier in
Mhm.
their semesters, particularly for their practicum. Like I'm doing more like presenting problems, sort of like anticipatory before they start seeing clients. And so, some of that draws from my own experience or like other classes and scenarios that I'm like, oh, you might see this. And I'm trying to present in a way for them to kind of work through and kind of think through and build some skill around how they might approach certain client scenarios before that client's actually sitting in there in front of them.
Yep. Yeah, that's great. Yes, thank you. Yeah, it's great to see how we work through this in research areas and then move it into, okay, we're going to practice this with students in the classroom. Okay, now let's take it out and apply this to using it with clients or with particular organizations or study abroad. And yeah, that's great. This is a great group for getting ideas about a wide range of different ways to apply this. And it's so powerful. The learning lasts when students are learning in this active, engaged, experiential way. So kudos to all of you for thinking about this and how you might use it and putting in the time with the students. That's wonderful. And then Kevin, how did you come up with problems when you were doing this?
Yeah, so I'm looking back at some of my content right now, actually, from
Good for you.
Yeah. And so like for I'm going to stick with the art history because when I worked with my international students, it was all content based and I worked with students in all different design disciplines. And so it just got really huge. But for the sake of this discussion, it's a little bit more focused if I just talk about Stonehenge, for example, and the lesson with Stonehenge. And I am really drawing upon, so I'm an instructional designer, everyone. And so I'm constantly looking at learning theory and I'm constantly applying learning theory to the classroom, on site or online. And so one of the key proponents of project-based or inquiry-based learning is David Merrill. And so you begin just by activating students' interests in this. So like with Stonehenge, really big, general, broad questions like, what do you know? Have you heard about Stonehenge? And they've, like, that's always been successful. But then thinking more deeply about what would compel a group of people for well over 1,000 years to work on the same structure, to be constantly improving it, to redesign it. And then thinking about materials, where they would get materials from, thinking about moving materials, thinking about erecting the stones and arranging the stones, and just all these different components about Stonehenge that are worthy of discussion, which are still there's still many questions too. But like looking at, so like just general knowledge and then having them apply knowledge and looking at sources. And so even that turns into a scholarly activity of, are you looking at Wikipedia? Are you looking at the British government website about Stonehenge, cultural websites? There's many different ways you can look at that. And then integrating this knowledge and how they then can go from inquiry to, all right, now we're gathering facts from reputable sources, to then presenting their information. And I did a lot of work with undergraduate and graduate students. So earlier in today's workshop, you were talking about the importance of, and I'm going to kind of rephrase it my way, but the team teaching component. And so I have the graduate students then end up teaching the undergraduate students. And this was a way for all the different skill sets to be working really harmoniously, and holding students accountable for their learning. So I'm afraid I might have gone off topic at this point.
No. That's awesome. Thank you. Thank
Am I
you
still
very
on
much.
track? Okay.
Yeah, and when you were talking about the graduate students and with the undergraduate students, a number of people teach courses where we have a section that has undergrads and then there's some grads, and a number of people also have graduate assistants. And so that's an important point as well. So yeah, thank you. Thank you very much.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
And okay, so different ways you can find a problem. Um, there's so many ways. Discussions with the students, colleagues, textbooks, media, there's so many different sources of information now. Um, so just kind of think about those various sources of information. And there's the University of Delaware has a group of people who've been working on problem-based learning for quite a while now. And the link will be in the slides that you get. I would encourage you to take a look at that. And you can see there are people on there that share examples of they've created these um, instructions and for the instructor, for the students, different handouts. And so you can kind of look at those and see how other people have developed the resources and the class materials and things that they use for this. And so, yes, I will share the slides and the resources with you. And then you can kind of see what other people have done and how you might adapt that for your own resources. And then evaluating the problem-based learning. People say, well, this is great, but how do I evaluate this? And the American Association of Colleges and Universities has a project called the Value Rubrics. And there's a link in here, and it's research based. They developed 16 rubrics, and the rubrics are on different things like critical thinking, problem solving, communication, analytical thinking, things like that. You can take a look at those. They are open educational resources, so you can use those and adapt those. You don't have to start from scratch in terms of coming up with ways to assess the students on this. So we're very fortunate that a lot of these resources are out there. And this is a screen capture of the critical thinking value rubric, and it has the standard parts of the rubrics, and you can take these and adapt them to your own needs. It's definitely a good start as it's research based. You might have, depending upon if you're in a face-to-face class or what types of tools you have, you might have them do a project like this. That there's a room in the library here at NIU's main library on campus that has the movable whiteboards, and I found that it's really good. I used it a number of times for, I was teaching a UNIV 101 course, because typically I teach doctoral students, and I said, I really want to, teach different levels of students. And so there was an opportunity to teach brand new students coming in. And so I found this room at the library on campus, and it has these movable whiteboards, and it was great for those types of small group activities, and they could write all these things up and move them around. And it really was a great way if you need some kind of a room like that. There is one in the library that's really good for that. And students really like it. It's another way for them to, kind of get up, get engaged, move around, collaborate. And then you might have something that looks like this for one of the phases of their work on the project. And then when you're talking about active learning, we know that active and engaged learning and inquiry-based learning has really a significant impact on students learning, moving it from their understanding from the working memory to the long-term memory, and they need to be able to retrieve that back. And so you're giving those opportunities to do that in this problem-based learning activity. So it's way up on the active learning continuum. So it takes some time, but it's definitely has a high payoff. And then a quote from James Rim: what students learn about collaboration and different approaches to a problem, cooperation, and responsibility makes their learning in the PBL courses multi-sided, richer, and in that way deeper. It's a simple but powerful comment about problem-based learning. And just to kind of pose a bit of a question, how do you think using problem-based learning might benefit you as an instructor or benefit your students? Just take a moment and think about that.
Did you want us to respond to?
Yeah, please go ahead, Kimberly. Thank you.
I think the thing that applicability is the short form. I think in variable education settings, so like from elementary school on through even higher education and some doc programs, and sometimes the applicability of the knowledge, there's a gap. And so I think problem-based learning approaches can help fill those gaps to make the information, the education, the purposefulness, to add purposefulness where some students, may get frustrated or bored, especially I think in some gen ed classes where, if they have a certain major. And so I think that can help bridge those gaps. I think in some gen ed courses, it can be challenging, but I still think like there's an opportunity to, like as instructors, to talk about multiple application or transferability of some of the knowledge through problem-based learning, or the types of problems that we present. So that's my thought.
Yeah. Yeah, that's excellent points. Thank you very much. Excellent points.
I can also add to that, and that is, as educators, sometimes, especially when we teach the same course or the same content over and over, it's easy to assume things, and we think students know something and they don't.
Mm-hmm.
And we can gloss over topics quickly, and the benefit of approaching it this way is it really gives students time to think and digest, and it helps us as educators not forget. You don't
Mm-hmm.
assume they're going to know something. And when I started teaching in the 90s, I could make references that everyone got, but as the years progressed, I learned that sometimes my references were now outdated. And I was
Mm-hmm.
working with a new demographic of students. And the benefit of project-based learning or problem inquiry-based learning is so much discussion comes up, and
Mm-hmm.
you learn so much about where the students are at. And you would never get that in a more traditional teacher-centered role of just talking at students for X amount of time. So I grew, and every time I would approach something, it's like looking at it for the very first time myself because of the lens, the perspectives that my students brought to the discussion. So I appreciated that.
Mm-hmm. Yes, excellent points. Yes, definitely. Definitely. And each group, like you said, it's different. Each group is different. And it keeps us really enthused and engaged, helps us to see how they're progressing. There's that formative assessment going on throughout the entire process because you're getting the information from them and seeing where they're at. And yep, that's great. You're exactly On point. Thank you.
Mhm.
And just to summarize, the problem-based learning, they're ill-structured problems. There's more than one solution. It assists in their skill development. You help them with, there's guidelines to help them approach the problem. You're facilitating coaching. And it's a really exciting process. That's just some images to show a complex problem that they might be addressing in a class. And to kind of wrap up, thank you all very much for sharing your perspectives and for your dedication to NIU and your students and all of your hard work. Each of you is deeply appreciated. And if you do want to contact or connect with us, we have a wonderful team to help you. And I will be sharing with you the slides, and there's a number of resources on there. And then you can look at some of those samples for consideration when you're coming up with your own problem-based learning activities. So if there's I can stay on, if there's any other comments people want to make, but each of you is deeply appreciated. Thank you.
Thank you.
You're
Yes,
welcome.
thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.